good. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon to Hudson Institute. My name is Lee Smith. I'm a senior fellow here at Hudson. I want to introduce our panel. This is probably the one room in all of Washington, I believe, this week that is discussing the Middle East that will have nothing to do with the Iran deal. However, we're going to see if someone on the panel is going to get extra points if they can tie in the Sinai insurgency, the Sinai campaign, into the Iran deal. I don't think it's going to happen, though. But thank you all very much for coming. We will be discussing the campaign in Sinai. We'll be discussing Egypt. And on the panel, first I want to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Sam Tadros, who is a senior fellow here at Hudson as well. To my immediate left is Jantzen. Garnett. Jantzen has been writing extensively on the campaign in the Sinai, where he's a frequent contributor, the Institute for Study of War. And all the way at the left, who will be leading off the panel this afternoon, he's been at Hudson before, a terrific colleague, Mokhtar Awad. We're going to go for about an hour and 15 minutes right now, and then I hope that we'll be able to open it up for your questions. So if something comes up, write it down or think about it, and I hope that we'll get to that before we settle up and close here at 1:30. In the meantime, Mokhtar, if you would like to lead off, thank you very kindly.
Thank you, Lee. It's always a pleasure to be back here, and always a pleasure to be on a panel with Sam. Nice to see Jantzen for the first time. The topic we're going to discuss today is, of course, I think, if we try to frame the importance of it, we all know the tired points. Egypt is the largest country in the region, and many countries tend to follow the way of Egypt, as the saying goes. But to speak frankly, Egypt is a country that more or less now is looked at as one that is to expect what the bad things are, or what the negatives are, or what kind of chaos it could possibly bring, as opposed to a country that can have added value in the region. And that's, of course, another issue to be dealt with. So we focus on the security situation, which, to be honest, I don't feel has necessarily been analyzed in a structured way ever since July of 2013. There's a lot of political points being made. Morsi's ouster happened, the coup happened, and therefore this is what we get, and this is the direct result of that. Or simply because there is repression of the MB, then you'll continue to get violence, and that's that. The reality is that there is a very complex security situation in Egypt, or threat kind of matrix, if you will. And I'll briefly go through that. In Egypt, we have multiple threat theaters and multiple threat actors. And when we talk about the theaters, the first and most obvious is, of course, the Sinai and the insurgency that's in the Sinai. And here's the first group: indigenous, Sinai-based jihadist groups with links to international jihadi organizations. The second theater is largely mainland Egypt. I will include here the Delta and Upper Egypt, of course, in Cairo. And to a smaller extent, we could add a potential third theater, hopefully not, and that's, of course, the Western Desert. When we talk about the other groups that are operating in Egypt, of course, the most dominant and the deadliest is the Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, now so-called Sinai province, after it pledged allegiance to ISIS in November of 2014. But in reality, there's been a parallel track of violence, if you will, that has sprung up since July of 2013. And that's mainly what I would classify, or Sam, or most people, for lack of a better definition, as violent but non-jihadist Islamist groups, or groups that are dominated by Islamists. They may not have a distinctively Islamist name or even a distinct ideology. But anyone who knows anything about Egypt understands that the people who constitute these groups are mainly Islamists, and of course the overall political implication is that they are engaged in violence in order to advance political objectives that, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood has as to return to power, or for a more immediate reason that they're acting in retribution for abuses by the security services. And the other distinction that we have to make is that in mainland Egypt, we have these types of groups, and I'll go and give an overview of who they are. And we also have indigenous, if you will, or homegrown native jihadist organizations. And this is a little bit important because we used to, of course, have insurgency in the Sinai for a number of years preceding Morsi's ouster. But before that, of course, some terrorist attacks that happened in the 2000s. But this is something that kind of operated very much in that orbit, has ties to, has been influenced by what's going on in Gaza over the years, and has historically had some ties to Al-Qaeda. But since the 1990s, we haven't really had any substantial or even noticeable presence of international jihadists who are active in mainland Egypt. And in this category of these mainland-based jihadist groups, we really have one group, and that's called the Ajnad Masr group. And to me, that is one of the more interesting/worrying group, because in that category is where you can see things might end up. These thus far non-jihadist militants, again, who are mainly either Muslim Brotherhood or non-affiliated Islamists who don't necessarily have distinct ideology but want to break down the government. There isn't really a strategy. The strategy is simply, well, chaos. And again, as I said, revenge. And in complete polar opposite, you have these jihadist groups that, well, now is affiliated with the Islamic State, and it very much transcends what these people are really concerned about, and that is either this government falling or paying, again, exacting retribution. And so in the middle, you have the option, if you will, of having a locally focused group that is very well jihadist in its orientation, but at the same time not interconnected with operationally groups like the Islamic State or even Al-Qaeda. And that is in a way what Ajnad Masr represents. Although the State Department and others say that it's technically a break-off or breakaway group from Ansar Bait al-Maqdis, but operationally and in their narrative, in their sophistication of their attacks, these weren't simply a ABM cell that was unleashed, because their early attacks are very rudimentary, and they grew in sophistication. The group, there was a bit of a hiatus for over the past 3 months or so, but I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, they took responsibility for an attack. So anyways, this gives you kind of an overview of the types of groups operating, and understanding that even though we see militancy, it's happening by different actors for different reasons in different places. And the key thing, the hypothesis, if you will, the way that I have been thinking about it and trying to understand and put in context really what kind of real threat this violence could actually mean for the state of Egypt, for the survivability of the state. The way things are, none of these actors by themselves really represent that type of threat. So Ansar Bait al-Maqdis, especially lately, it's been getting extra scary. And just on a tangential point, something that's really worrying is not actually the consulate attack necessarily that happened, but for me, it's the attack or the attempted attack on the Cairo-Suez road. This is an area that to me is simply inexplicable. How is it that they can have a presence there? It's supposed to be heavily secured. If not technically, I mean, this is not written in stone, but from my understanding, one of the most, if not the most secured corridors in all of Egypt, because it ties obviously Cairo to the Sinai in a major way, and that road itself, or the major road there, was built by the army, and we've had a presence there in September of 2014. There was a shootout in the northern part of the Eastern Mountains, which is again southwest of Suez, and at the time. Similar thing that happens now, again, a very worrying attack, but there was no follow-up of explaining how that came to be. So it's tying the September incident of militants being present, again, west of Suez, and just this week, a suspected suicide bombing, an attempted suicide bombing, maybe, and this is pure, not really based on any actionable information, but it seems like there is a presence that we haven't been made aware of, not just in Cairo, which the Italian consulate attack makes obvious, but also in the eastern region of Cairo, which is a desert area and is a mountainous area as well. But back to what I'm saying about what's my overriding kind of focus, what I look at as what could potentially actually be the thing that could begin to break down. And this is unfortunately very doom and gloom, but it's something that I have thought about for quite some time over the past year or so. I will have a paper coming out later this summer that's based on all of this research, and that the Sinai group is largely confined to the Sinai, both in terms of its objectives and largely in terms of its operations. And this is because they don't necessarily have, I think, the framework to position themselves as the top Egyptian Islamist jihadist group. And I think they're attempting to be that. And especially with the pledge to ISIS, it's forcing them, and Sam can get a little bit into this. We will have a paper out on this very topic, I hope this next month. Their pledge to ISIS is kind of forcing them to be more than what they really are in their DNA, and that's a Sinai group. And at the same time, as this is happening, they can't do much because they're not present outside of the Sinai in a substantial way. And so the key threat is this reservoir of thousands of Islamist youth, really. Again, some brothers, but the majority are not actually affiliated with any group. Some people mistakenly, and perhaps it's a bit, let me not use the word, but some people mistakenly say these are liberals or seculars. This is just absolutely hogwash. These are other people, not because you're not operationally inside the Muslim Brotherhood, that makes you then a liberal. There are many people who their worldview is very much is exactly like the Islamists. And the fact that they're not part of the organization doesn't mean that now we have liberal Egyptians who are involved with this. No, this is, if there are cases, these are very rare cases. And for the most part, these again are people who have an Islamist worldview. And the problem is whether or not these individuals, over the long term, as they see that their current tactics aren't really actually getting them anywhere, this idea of exacting retribution without having an overriding ideology and a major objective to actually achieve regime change, then the best possible example to follow, and the group that quite literally has the means, the idea, the full package, that I can promise you, look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Libya. We can do this here too. If you can imagine an ISIS salesperson. That I think is a very good package that these people can find appealing. And things are only recently starting to move in this direction, I believe. I interviewed an ISIS member, an Egyptian ISIS member, who was in Aleppo. This was in the late summer of last year. And I asked him why he went there. And he said, well, Egypt is not a land that's ripe for jihad. And of course, I'm summarizing the conversation. And what I'm afraid is that more and more people like him who are susceptible to joining groups like ISIS would begin to see that actually, well, maybe conditions could be ripe for jihad in Egypt. And so if we start to see things moving in that direction, that more of these youth are joining ISIS or themselves creating jihadist groups, because again, being jihadist or being Salafi jihadist, there means that there's going to be an overriding ideology that's going to allow them to have an objective to take over the state as they would want it. There is where we have the possibility of small groups picking up arms in some villages, in some towns, in certain places. Get more in detail about this. There are certain flashpoints, definitely, that if you go on a map, you can easily tell if things do go south, this is where it's going to happen, most likely. And we have seen kind of indications of this, and this will be the last point. In July of 2013, when there were very few, sure, but even 2 or 3 are problematic, towns that were outside police control in July, and many more towns that actually could have went that way. And I'm afraid that if we start having a situation where these groups, so one of them is Revolutionary Punishment, which has carried out more than 130 attacks, claimed to have killed 150. I couldn't verify this independently. But if a group like that who's shown promise of being able to carry out sophisticated attacks, if they decide to change course and actually pick up weapons and try their luck, that is, I think, the kind of war, the kind of fighting, kind of symmetrical warfare that I don't think the security services in Egypt are well equipped for. Frankly, any security service in the world will have a major problem dealing with. And we can get into the policy side of things. And I think this should be the thing that is always in the back of our minds about what exactly we need to be preventing. Of course, ISIS in Sinai is a big problem, but I think it could be ultimately confined. But something like this, if it spreads, it's a cancer that really you can't stop if it starts spreading. So I'll end it here, and my colleagues can pick up on other aspects.
Yeah, thanks, Mokhtar. That was terrific. One of the things that I'm glad that you did touch on a number of different things, especially this is one of the things I'll come back to when I'm asking you guys questions. What does it mean that they're affiliated with ISIS right now? What does that mean in particular with this group? And also, how much will this look like the various insurgencies that we saw, the Islamist insurgencies in the 80s and 90s, which of course which did come to Cairo and which came to other places. So that's a terrific introduction. Thanks very much. Jantzen, I'm going to ask you to go next.
Okay, well, thank you to the Hudson Institute and for Lee for hosting this event. And I'm very honored to be a part of this panel with these two excellent experts. I'd like to just take a few moments and talk about the specific security situation in the Sinai Peninsula, and specifically ISIS's affiliate, Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, or Wilayat Sinai Province, whatever you would like to call it. The security situation in the Sinai is, in my view, very discouraging, and I don't see it improving anytime soon. Over the past 9 months, really, since Ansar Beit al-Maqdis pledged allegiance to ISIS and became Wilayat Sinai, we've seen them progressively conduct more sophisticated attacks, more complex attacks, and acquire more sophisticated weaponry. A lot of people were really surprised just over 2 weeks ago on July 1st when Wilayat Sinai conducted this large attack targeting several different security checkpoints throughout North Sinai. In my view, and I know there are people that disagree with this, but it was an apparent attempt to seize Sheikh Zayed, city in North Sinai, and actually hold territory, much like ISIS does in parts of Iraq and Syria. The size of the operation itself was unprecedented, for sure. But in my opinion, I don't think that it was necessarily completely unexpected. We've seen since October, November of last year, their attacks become much more sophisticated and much more complex. Their inaugural attack, as Wilayat Sinai was in October, against the Karam al-Qawadis, and that was the group's very first complex attacks, combining the tactics of a suicide car bomb along with armed assault. And then following that, we've seen this progression of attacks in complexity, and more recently with very sophisticated weapons, such as guided anti-tank missiles, recoilless rifle systems, and apparently extensive use of man pads to deter aircraft in their recent attack on Sheikh Zayed on July 1st. Ultimately, they were forced basically to withdraw from Sheikh Zayed, but it took more than 10 hours for the Egyptian military to force them out of the city, and they had to call in the Air Force, and this was probably one of the primary reasons they were forced to withdraw. Despite the intensified effort by the Egyptian military after forcing them out of the city of Sheikh Zayed, despite all this, they continue to launch deadly attacks against security forces throughout North Sinai. And as far as control of territory in North Sinai, let me just posit a few of my thoughts. There's not any one group that really controls certain areas of North Sinai. The Egyptian military will have military posts, checkpoints throughout the province, but outside of these stationary checkpoints, they don't really control much terrain. And the militants actually have free reign in a lot of this area. they have these four-wheel drive vehicles. It's a desert. They don't need to use the roads. And so what they'll do, they litter the roads with roadside IEDs. And therefore, whenever the security forces are forced to move out of their bases, they have to deal with multitudes of IEDs along the roadway, which has, even this week, led to armored vehicles being destroyed, and have in the past led to deaths among security forces and injuries. Nevertheless, regardless of their forced removal from Sheikh Zayed on July 1st, the militants appear, in my opinion at least, to be readjusting, at least in the short term, their goals. I think now that they were proved unsuccessful in their attempt to seize and hold terrain in Sheikh Zayed, I think they're going to revert back to the tactic of just targeting security forces in an attempt to degrade the security environment so that they can, in the future, attempt again to seize territory. We've seen other worrying tactics employed by Wilayat Sinai, particularly the use of IEDs targeting the homes of security officials, particularly in the provincial capital, Al Arish. They've used this tactic over the past year, but it really seems to have picked up this past month. I don't want to really compare the situation in Egypt with that in Iraq, but it's very reminiscent of ISIS's tactics around Mosul prior to the fall of Mosul, where they would go in and target, in a very personal way, security officials, blowing up their homes. And so we've seen this. In fact, this past week there have been 4 that have been claimed by Wilayat Sinai, but we've had over the past month even more than that, around a dozen or so that have been claimed specifically by Wilayat Sinai, and then others have been reported in the press that haven't been claimed. But this tactic of house-born IEDs really is an intimidation tactic used by the group, and what it basically indicates is that the group has the capability to conduct an intelligence to find out where these low and mid-level security officials live, and then actually do operations inside the provincial capital to target these houses. Furthermore, Wilayat Sinai has now conducted operations outside of the Sinai Peninsula with this attack in Suez province, east of Cairo, as Mokhtar was mentioning. But also, prior to that, just on Saturday, the car bomb attack that was claimed by ISIS against the Italian consulate is very concerning. Notably, it was claimed by ISIS, but not specifically attributed to Wilayat Sinai. This is significant insofar as it suggests that ISIS has a separate operational cell in the Cairo area, distinct from that of Wilayat Sinai. And this gives rise to the possibility that ISIS is preparing to expand its operations far outside of Sinai into the heart of Egypt, into Cairo, and we may, in the coming months, actually see a new Wilayat up here in Egypt. And this is very concerning for the stability, not just in Sinai, but for all of Egypt. How am I on time?
If you want a couple more minutes.
Just a couple other things I'll note is, as far as the insurgency measures taken by the government, some of these measures, such as the buffer zone in Rafah along the border with the Gaza Strip, the curfew, and then other collective punishment type measures, has a negative impact on the population who already distrust the government, and adds to the list of grievances of the local population. And this, in turn, pushes people that were possibly on the fence to go and actually join these organizations, or if not join, they at least sympathize with Wilayat Sinai more and ISIS and their ideology. I'll close there.
Okay, great. Terrific. It was a very helpful introduction, very helpful describing what the actual campaign is looking like. And one of the things that I definitely want to come back to is look, what does it mean to actually control a space as large as the Sinai? When you're talking about they have the government, the regime has control of checkpoints and stuff like that, but around there it's very hard. So in order to win this insurgency, in order to bring peace to the Sinai, what's that going to look like for the state to control it? So Jantzen, thanks very much. Sam, if you would like to round it off, and
Sure.
Thanks very much.
Well, thanks, Lee, for organizing and hosting this panel. And the virtue of being last is, of course, that you learn everything that needs to be learned from the two gentlemen.
And then you get to write everything down.
That spoke before you. So I'll be very brief in what I say, not to repeat everything that was already said. I'll basically raise 3 points here. The first point, echoing what Mokhtar has said, Egypt is facing 4 different security challenges. That's important to understand, because the lack of understanding that they are different security challenges helps explain to us why the Egyptian regime has failed to deal with them. The fact that they cannot distinguish between those various threats and thus develop strategies to face them helps us understand why we're talking still about these threats today, 2 years after the military supposedly said that it would end the situation in Sinai and the terrorism threat in a couple of days. So these 4 challenges, Mokhtar has described them. There is a threat coming from Libya. Obviously, the fall of the Qaddafi regime there has meant that it's an ungovernable territory. There are 3 affiliates of ISIS already existing in Libya. There's a civil war going on. There's an abundance of weapons. And it's a 1,000-kilometer border with Egypt, where the military historically has not had a strong presence. The army was always deployed to the east to fight Israel, and does not have the kind of local connections on the ground with the tribes there, that the tribes are already well connected to their Libyan counterparts. So the threat there is serious. It's the one that can really lead to a serious destabilization of Egypt, especially if that threat is able to go through the Western Desert and tap into the Islamist reservoir in the south of the country, where we have to remember these are the territories that voted with the higher percentages for the Muslim Brotherhood, for the Salafis. This is Islamist heartland in Egypt. The second threat is, of course, Wilayat Sinai. And here again, I'd stress, it is Wilayat Sinai. It's not a coincidence that when they gave their allegiance to ISIS, they didn't get the title Wilayat Egypt. They got the title Wilayat Sinai, because they are a Sinai-based group. Of course, historically, their development has to do with Salafi jihadists escaping the rule of Hamas in Gaza. It has to do with local jihadis in Egypt coming from the mainland to Sinai. But today, the organization, for all intent and purpose, is a Sinai-based organization. The third is obviously this threat of a terrorist organization. Mokhtar mentioned Jantzen. They had a number of attacks. The military was successful in killing their leader, but they can re-emerge again. They had been historically, or they had been affiliated with Al-Qaeda, not with ISIS. But we also have there in the mainland this possibility of an ISIS mainland Egypt threat. We still don't know. No one has claimed the assassination of the Egypt's prosecutor general, Hisham Barakat, a huge operation not conducted by a small group, and no one has claimed responsibility. Again, as was mentioned, the attack on the Italian consulate was claimed by ISIS itself, not by Wilayat Sinai. So we don't really know if we're going to see the emergence of a new group. And lastly, of course, as Mokhtar mentioned, these various groups, former Muslim Brotherhood members, supported by the Muslim Brotherhood in some cases, the Revolutionary Punishment, Anonymous, they've been conducting low-level warfare, basically. They're targeting security personnel, they're targeting electricity power stations, they're attempting to destroy the infrastructure. For a while, they were targeting economic international corporations, KFC, Vodafone, various mobile companies, and the such. So that's the kind of terrain or security challenges we're dealing with. Now let's move. My second point is about the Sinai. In the Sinai, of course, we have a number of negatives, to put mildly. First, we have obviously a group that has a certain level of local support. They are existing in a habitat that, for a variety of reasons, is welcoming to their existence. Historically, the Sinai has been neglected by the Egyptian state. Historically, the abuses by the Egyptian security forces have created a rejection of the Egyptian authorities. People there no longer feel that they are part of Egypt, that they belong or to that Egyptian nation. So they are tapping into that. And of course, helping that is the fact that the military tactics so far have been attempting to alienate the population, not win them. If the US implemented, General Petraeus implemented counterinsurgency in Iraq, the Egyptians are trying to do the exact opposite. They'll kill the whole population and thus kill the militants, basically. If you go through the numbers that the Egyptian military announces every day or every week about the number they've killed in Sinai, by now they've killed, what, 1/4 maybe of the Sinai population? Of course, no one takes the numbers very seriously, but that's the kind of indiscriminate violence that's being used, and that's helping ISIS there. They've also had a huge sophistication in terms of weapons. We've had 2 naval attacks so far. One of them was a defector from the military who killed his co-sailors, got his ISIS team on it, and attempted to use the ship in an attack on Israel. It was foiled, and then the Air Force, the F-16s, ended that attack. And then you had this attack just, 2 days ago, where they targeted a ship, a Navy ship in the sea. So we now know that they have advanced weaponry to target the Egyptian Navy. They also have advanced weaponry to target the Egyptian Air Force. We've had incidents before of attacking Apache helicopters, of various helicopters used by the military. And this is why what ended the assault on the Sheikh Zayed after 10 hours was the F-16s and not the helicopters, because the Egyptian military knew very well that if the helicopters were sent, they would be automatically targeted by them. And we've also had a huge number of, at least huge in terms of advancement techniques, of former military officers joining ISIS Sinai. The guy running their military operations is a former, what would be the equivalent of the SEALs in Egypt, is special forces in Egypt. We've had the ISIS terrorists that conducted the suicide attack on the Minister of Interior in 2013, September or so of 2013, was a former officer. We have about 10, 15 officers, mid-level officers that we know of at least, that are there. So these guys are bringing in their expertise. They're not just your regular Joes who are turning into violence. These are guys that have had military training, that know what they're doing with these weapons. On the positive side, and there are some positives, one must say, it's a peninsula, meaning that at the end of the day, it might take you time, it might take you years, depending on how incompetent you are, but it's a peninsula. You can isolate it, you can close the doors from both sides and deal with it. So the geography of the Sinai is not helping the terrorists in this. And this brings me to the second point of the positives, that there is both a capable and willing partner on the other side of the border. Meaning Egypt is greatly benefiting from the fact that Israel is there on the border. For the first time, we're seeing extremely high-level cooperation on intelligence. One way, one might add, i.e. the Israelis are helping the Egyptians deal with the situation in Sinai. So they're getting better intelligence because of the Israeli presence. They're getting better information monitoring and all of that. Lastly, and this does matter in a region where we've seen armies that are running all around, that are run away from battle, as in Mosul or as in other armies around the region, the Egyptian army is fighting. It's not running away. It's not abandoning its post. It's not escaping from battle. This is a country that is not divided among sectarian or ethnic lines like Libya, Syria, or in Iraq. This is a country that has had a very strong sense of nationhood, that its army is willing to defend its post. And that, in a sense, is very important in battle. Now, my last point is about the US policy towards Egypt and towards these challenges. Obviously, Egypt is important to the United States. We know all the traditional reasons. The Suez Canal is there, and of course, the threat from the Sinai to free passage in the Suez Canal is huge. It borders Israel. It's the most populated country in the Arab world and all of that. And in a sense, U.S. policy towards Egypt has been guided by this Cold War mentality. Ever since Dr. Kissinger came to Egypt in 1974, the idea was Egypt is the most important Arab country. We're going to bring Egypt out of the Soviet orbit, bring it to the American orbit. It will lead the region for peace, prosperity, and everything. The reality is this is no longer the Egypt we're dealing with. Egypt is no longer a regional player that will be able to lead Palestinians and Israelis into some kind of peace process. It will not play an important role in the Sunni camp countering Iran. Egypt is no longer a regional player. It's really a playing field, meaning it's a country that is being a playing field that's being contested by other countries, by regional players, by local players, international players. It's no longer one of the competitors in the region. It's the prize in the region. And this requires an adjustment in U.S. policy towards Egypt. We no longer need to invest in an Egypt policy in order to help the Egyptians bring the Palestinians and Israelis to the negotiation table. We need to invest in an Egypt that doesn't follow the line of Iraq, Syria, and others. We need to invest in an Egypt that does not become, as the title of the discussion today, a Somalia on the Nile.
Sam, that was terrific. That was great. I just want to ask you a couple quick questions, then I do want to get into the ISIS issue. First of all, those advanced weapons that have been showing up in Sinai, I believe the Israelis have said this is Hamas who fed them these weapons, or what do we know about that? I mean, are the advanced are they from Hamas, or how'd they get there?
I don't think we know for sure, okay. But Hamas, they've been known to operate Garnett anti-tank guided missiles, and that's what is being used in the Sinai. Okay. But it's also been used in Libya. Yeah. So it could be coming from either place or both. All right. We don't know for sure.
Okay, good. That's the other question I wanted to ask about.
To add on that, historically there have been a lot of weapon smuggling from Sudan to Egypt. That's historically speaking. Now the situation in Libya changed that. Now Libya is really the place that the weapons are coming from. There's an abundance of weapons there. And again, it's an easy border, it's an open border. There are weapons coming from there. So I think there are various routes whereby these weapons come from.
Okay, my question is why? I found it when you were speaking and you said the Egyptian army, they don't really have any relations with the tribes out there in the Western Desert. They don't really know them. How is that possible? I mean, this is at least one thing that the Syrian regimes, the Iraqi regimes, different regimes have usually been pretty good at having relationships with local tribes, but they have none with a neighbor that's been their neighbor forever. How is that possible?
I think it's a number of factors. First, Egypt doesn't recognize the existence of tribes within it in the first place. I mean, a famous Egyptian diplomat in the early 90s, Tahsin Bashir, made a comment about the whole Arab world, that Egypt was the only nation state in the region. The others were all tribes with flags, basically. It tells you something about the Egyptian view of oneself. It's the first country that became modern in the Arab world. It's a country that was the center of the idea of modernity in the region. So Egypt's self-sense in this way prohibits it from recognizing the existence of that.
It's interesting. Is that another problem with the Sinai as well?
In a sense, yes. And of course, it helps in the fact that they are very minute in terms of population compared to the reality. I mean, Sinai as a whole has 1 million and a half population. Marsa Matruh, the Western Desert, has much less than that, 200,000, 300,000. You're talking about Cairo has about 20 million people. I mean, in a sea like that, these tribes are not important. The other factor, of course, is that the Western Desert was never a security threat to Egypt. The army was deployed in the east to fight Israel. That was where the wars were. That was where the threat was. Even after, the one instance where Egypt got involved to its western border was Sadat's attack on Libya in 1977. And that's a war that lasted for 2 days and that was over. So it hasn't the Egyptian army hasn't developed the kind of infrastructure of relationship, building trust with the locals there in order to be able to build a counter.
Do we have any sense that that's happening now at all?
I mean, there's been a lot of meetings, yeah.
Mokhtar, would you
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the Western Desert, so specifically Matruh Governorate, in New Valley, I mean, there really just isn't much there. The people who do inhabit the area are very, very close to the valley. It's they're practically not really from the Western Desert. The problem with the Western Desert, Matruh area is more about we're not really sure to what extent the relationships are deep. So at the superficial level, actually, yes, there is a tribal council that the government, in some way, indirectly, has helped spring up. They by giving them a former office of the NDP, for instance, things like that. So they play the game. But the problem is that we don't know to what extent the tribal leaders in Matruh, the same issue as it is in the Sinai, they can actually influence their tribes. And what has helped out the Egyptians there is the fact that there is a significant number of valley inhabitants, Wafidin, as they call them, the immigrants. And that, in a way, kind of helps balance out a lot of the tribal's power influence in Matruh, gives obviously the core state and the military a kind of an ally there that they can rely on. And historically, of course, trade with Libya has helped kind of make sure that this area at least has a semblance of decent economic activity. I've always went to Marsa Matruh growing up, and the Souk Libya there was always the place where you can get the cheap imported stuff from Europe. But the problem was Marsa Matruh. This is something I still have yet to publish on, but it should come out in some form before the end of the year. Is that you do have a strong Salafi presence there historically. And what we've seen almost coincidentally, as with the Sinai, the Salafization of the Bedou in their customs, in their religiosity, and the Salafi Dawah of Alexandria, the strongest satellite presence that it had historically has been in Matruh. And in August of 2013, we kind of got a very small glimpse into the abyss, if you will. The head leader of the Salafi Dawah in Matruh, his name is Sheikh Ali Ghallab. Don't quote me on this, I may be mixing his name a little bit. Ali Ghallab, he stood in front of the Matruh train station and summarizing his very fiery speech. This is on the day of Rab'a. He said, we'll close all the roads from here to Alexandria. There will be no police, there will be no business, everything will be shut down. And of course, there were some violent clashes there, and a number of people died, at least 4 or so. And again, it's been mostly kind of a strike of luck. I actually want to give the military a little bit of credit there, but again, I think it's because of these, these factors, that there's just so many people from the Nile Valley, that there is a bit of economic activity. The governor of Matruh before the revolution, as you know, anyone who's from Egypt knows this anecdotally, there's always this one good governor that everyone tries to remember. In Matruh, this was the guy who brought McDonald's to the beach, so that's pretty impressive. And so anyways, they had some economic activity, and the military was actually, and this is actually a very interesting case study, and that's why I've gotten interested in it, and we'll have something out summarizing the story, which unfortunately hasn't really been out there. They acted almost 180 degrees different from the way they acted in the Sinai. Very quickly, they sat down. Who's afflicted? We're going to give you blood money. Settle down. We're not, let's not flare things up. Let's not cause any problems. And sure enough, they were able to exert influence on the Salafi Dawah Sheikh, who was standing there and deviating from the flock of the Dawah. And basically threatening that we're going to do all that you've ever feared will happen. And they got to him and they convinced him that the Brotherhood was trying to use him as a tool to destabilize the governorate. And within a month, he was standing in a celebration on Matruh National Day and thanking the military intelligence of the governorate for standing up for the people. So in a way, they got to him. They either scared the living out of him.
Well, look, you said they were paying blood money and they were dealing with. Look, why isn't this then? It seems that in a sense, the state does know in some ways how to deal.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that struck me when the three of you were speaking in your opening remarks, you kept coming back to the idea of revenge.
Yeah.
Right? You all kept coming back to the idea of revenge, and without turning this into an anthropological exercise, but clearly revenge is an aspect of Egyptian culture. So why does the state, why does the army go into Sinai the way it does that you were describing, Sam, and it's proud of the indiscriminate casualties that it racks up? Why can't it do the same thing that Mokhtar is describing here in Matruh? Why? What's the issue? Sam, actually, if you want to start with this,
Sure.
then we'll, then we'll actually go. And Jantzen, I'm going to ask you again, just like in terms of, even in this way, in terms of what the state is getting wrong about Egyptian society, because it seems in some ways that's what you're describing, and that's what Mokhtar said went right in the desert.
Partly, I think they don't know anything else but to shoot indiscriminately. I mean, that's what they've been trained to do. The level of training competency of the troops is highly questionable, to say the least. So on the one hand, that's the very nature of the kind of training that these guys have had. But I also think partly it's there is a push for such violence, such indiscriminate killing of people in the Sinai, inside mainland Egypt by the population at large. I mean, if the military kills 10, the kind of reactions you get in Egypt, why didn't they kill 100? I've heard.
Why?
I mean, it's the fight against the Muslim Brotherhood, against largely Islamists in Egypt, is a fight to the death. And the population that rejected the Muslim Brotherhood's rule, whatever percentage we will ascribe to each side, there is a clear divide today in Egypt. And I mean, I remember in the early days the song that was sang, that we are a peoples and you are a people. We're not even the same people any longer. So there is this, I don't want to use the word fascist, but there is this push inside Egypt for indiscriminate violence. People are unhappy. They think the army is too weak in the way that it deals with the Sinai. And the pressure is actually on the military to be harder. You remove people from next to the Rafah crossing, remove all of Sinai and just bomb the whole place until you kill all the terrorists. That's a typical attitude to get in Egypt.
Is the
and I
military...
think
Okay, I'm sorry.
it's also an attitude inside the troops, meaning the regular soldiers and low-level officers are the ones being killed in the battlefield. And they're still being killed, and the attacks are continuing, and there's no solution. Egypt did a unified command for the first time on the Sinai, appointing the former head of the Third Army to run the whole of Sinai. Nothing has happened. They've killed so many people. Nothing has happened. So there's a lot of pressure from the low ranks towards the generals, and of course towards the top general, President Sisi. Be tough, do something, be more violent towards them. We need to defeat that threat.
Interesting. Jantzen,
And if I can add, in Sinai, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is still the case that the Bedouins are not allowed into the military, and so with the majority of the population in Sinai being Bedouin, they're not allowed to be part of this organization that is there to try and prevent the terrorists. And so a lot of the population views the military as like an occupying force because they're all Egyptians from the mainland. And then those inside the military, they view anyone out there as a possible threat, knowing that any of them could be a terrorist. And so they're very quick to open fire, very quick to think the worst of anyone approaching them. And so that just adds to the situation that we have there today.
Mokhtar, I wanted to come back to something you said, and then we'll go through another round like this. How did the Bedou become Salafist? How did this happen? How long has this been going on? What did the process look like? Is this relatively recent, or because it seems a little contradictory, right? That a Bedouin culture would become Salafist.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I'm not, an expert on it. I don't think I've only come across one paper. Well, there's one paper on the Sinai that was recently put out by Mara Refkin, who's a scholar in Yale, I believe. But before that, actually, a government-sponsored study by the Prime Minister's office in 2010 on mostly even focusing on the Western Desert. But in short, it's a very slow process of proselytization. I'll just stick with what I know most, and that's the Western Desert. There was a very slow process of proselytization. A lot of the younger members of these tribes, kind of tracked well, if you will, with Salafi teachings. Again, you had groups like the Salafi Dawah of Alexandria. So again, we have a very.
So who's proselytizing? Is that it? Who's proselytizing? I mean, a sheikh from Alexandria or Cairo will go and say, we can get these guys on our side, and
most likely,
you need to understand,
or people who are leaving to go in. People who are from these Bedouin communities being exposed to these ideas in mainland Egypt. But if I focus again on what I know a little bit best about, in the case of the Salafi Dawah, they kind of looked at these Bedouins, their practices and their customs many of them are actually contradictory of the teachings of Islam, and so in a way there was always a small sense, I can't say it's urgency, but a sense of importance that they gave to this, and we still see this to this day. He was actually heavily criticized for this, and it's actually quite messed up. Sheikh Yasser Burhami, one of his sermons in Matruh about a year ago, in passing, he was saying something along the lines of, we understand that, the age of marriage here is going to be lower, than what's legal and stuff like that. And so they even try to find a way to accommodate some of the things that the Bedouins keep to heart, and at the same time, and again, ensure that they're following the Salafi teachings. But I can't. It's something that requires a little bit more study. I can't actually say, well, what exactly eventually caused the replacement of Bedouin litigation. The traditional litigation was Salafi litigation. Again, some literature is out there, but I'm not an expert on it. But when we look at the implications of that, though, currently in a place like the Western Desert area of Matruh, you actually have many of the tribal elders. People are very practical and not really with the whole Salafi thing. And as I said, it's the younger people, and that creates a very distinct problem. To an extent, it exists in the Sinai. Although the problem with the Sinai is that just the tribal leadership is just so superficial. But the distinct problem it creates is that there's this double identity, where the Salafi youth, who's a member of the tribe, even if the tribe is well functioning, is at the end of the day going to have more loyalty for very obvious reasons to that Salafi ideology than his tribal elder. So that's something. If you go to Matruh and you speak to people, that's not a problem that they bring up. That's what we saw in Matruh right after Morsi's ouster. Is that even some of the elder sheikhs, religious sheikhs, who told them to stop, the youth didn't listen. They just said, well, you're with the sultans, or the tribes are bought and paid for by the government. So anyway, yes, some Egyptian Salafis have had an interest in spreading this in the Bedou, but more importantly for our purposes here is that it's significantly the youth sector that has been very much influenced by this ideology.
If I can...
Yes, please.
Salafism came and Islamism came to the desert through modernity, meaning it's when the Egyptian state began to modernize those areas. Send teachers, send doctors. The doctors, teachers, locals, bureaucrats working in the civil service that belonged already in the mainland to the Muslim Brotherhood or to other more radical groups, then brought their ideology. It's especially the role of teachers that ended up in Arish, in Sheikh Suwaid, in Marsa Matruh, in those places. That's very important to look at in how those places were slowly Salafized. In that sense, it's the more modernized elements within Bedouin culture that became Salafized, and not the guys back in the villages.
Not the super
who
traditional guys.
who didn't go to the schools.
Right.
It's the guys that were, in a sense, caught in between the new emerging cities in those deserts and between their local tribal connections. It's the alienated youth in the middle that had taken part in modernization but not completely become modern men that you can tie to this growth of Islamism.
Why don't they take the Bedouins into the military?
Because they don't trust them.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, what you're describing. What you're describing is the government has effectively created a second state that is now a Salafi state, basically. Mokhtar, were you going to?
No, just real quickly. Nothing too significant, but this is so pervasive that mainland origin Egyptians who are from Matruh, just because now their ID say Matruh, they suffer the same treatment, even though they're not Bedouin. And they can prove and they can tell them that we're actually from, Bahira, we're actually from Kafr al-Sheikh. It's just so pervasive. Sorry, it's just a tangential comment. But yeah.
I mean, especially in the Sinai, the Sinai was obviously occupied by Israel starting 67 until, not 73, until 82, when the Israelis finally withdrew from most of the Sinai. And during that period, the Egyptian state developed a mistrust of the Bedouins. The fact that a number of Bedouins coexisted with Israel, whether they cooperated, what's the meaning of collaboration, that's all complicated questions. But the fact that those tribes existed under Israeli rule for 15 years, then there's that question of loyalty that has always been there in the Egyptian
Is
mind.
that why the Israelis have better intelligence about the Sinai now?
Probably.
Is that they still have? No, it makes sense. Those networks would still exist that they have. Let me come back to the question that I want to ask about ISIS. So, first of all, what does it mean to become part of ISIS? Look, because it's been my impression with some ways is that, like with Al-Qaeda, right? You sort of pledge allegiance and they send you the membership cards and T-shirts and stuff like that. And maybe you get some money, maybe someone raises money from you, but you're not necessarily taking orders from a guy in a cave in Waziristan. ISIS, what does it mean that this is now Walayat Sinai, that this is a part of ISIS? Jantzen, do you want to?
What we've seen since their incorporation into ISIS back in November is, originally I was debating this. I was like, okay, well, what does it mean? I mean, Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis was already it was the deadliest group in Egypt before pledging to ISIS. So what's going to change? But over time, we saw that they started taking on the same tactics. I mentioned the house-born IEDs. Well, that's a tactic that ISIS in Iraq employed extensively. We saw beheadings significantly increase just prior to their Pledge of Allegiance and then following that. And then we've seen their capabilities as far as like constructing massive vehicle-borne IEDs, as well as a lot of it's just the techniques, the tactics they use.
So what happens? Does ISIS headquarters in Raqqa, do they send someone to?
We don't know for sure, but I think they would have had to have somebody come with and give them hands-on experience. It's not just like over email, sending them instructions on how to create an effective IED.
I mean, one way that you would imagine, one way you would imagine that some of the information is transmitted is that we know that there are plenty of Egyptian fighters in Syria. And so some of the guys who are coming back, they know different things. I would imagine that's one way.
Yeah, in March of 2014, Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis at the time gave eulogies on several other fighters that had been killed, and there were several of them which they specifically identified as having fought jihad in Iraq or Syria. And so we know for a fact that there were a number of fighters that fought, and had returned and joined the group. So certainly there's more than just those as well.
Sam, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question what it means to be ISIS. In a sense, you're getting the glory of the name, and it is a glorified name.
No, that's what I mean, and it was the same with Al-Qaeda. I guess that's what I mean. How much of this is branding, right? Because the Obama White House in lots of ways has made ISIS the key issue, what it perceives as a vital threat to U.S. security, and presumably that's here in the United States. That some guys, the few Americans who are fighting there would come back, or that this is becoming larger and larger. The different attacks are now being claimed by ISIS. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. How much of this is simply branding, and how much of it is really there's some sort of organized, larger institution or body? But you're right. Yeah. To this kind of person, it's a glorious name. So to be associated with ISIS, it's
the thing. I mean,
right.
After 85 years or 87 years of the Muslim Brotherhood, it's still where it began. It's out of power, being persecuted. After years of Salafi education trying to change the Egyptians are still the same people. After years of, Ayman al-Zawahiri has been fighting jihad against the Egyptian regime since 1964, when he joined the first jihadi cell.
Wow.
And where is Ayman al-Zawahiri today? Well, in a cave in Afghanistan or a villa in Pakistan, but besides the point. In both cases, he's not anywhere. He's not doing anything. But these kids, they take over Mosul, they declare a caliphate, they control a huge territory, not in some desert of Afghanistan that no one has heard of or cares about, not in Somalia, in the heartland of the Islamic Caliphate, the historical caliphate between Baghdad and Damascus. This is where the whole story is. So that's a huge brand for anyone. That's the cool group to be part of these days. There have been various reports in the Egyptian media. Of course, nothing in the Egyptian media should be taken without 10 grains of salt, to say the least. But about, for example, people being trained by ISIS in Libya. So various members from Sinai would go to Libya and be trained there. Again, how accurate it is, we don't know. As Jantzen mentioned, a number of ISIS Wilayat Sinai fighters had already fought in Syria. One of them, for example, the military officer who conducted, or the police officer who did the suicide attack on the Minister of Interior, he had fought in Syria. So there are all those links.
This was a police officer who
Yes, a former police officer, mid-level officer. And so you got those attacks, those kinds of links being there. But the big question, I think, that and this is where I think we have a disagreement about Sheikh Suwaid, is what it actually means to be ISIS. In the sense of, yes, you learn the military techniques, but ISIS is distinguished by its brutality, and we haven't seen that in Sinai. So there have been attacks, punishment against civilians that are accused of cooperation with the military. But to a large extent, they've tried to win the local population and not make them hate them. So it's not the ISIS types, it's not sending the heads in boxes to the tribal leaders to tell them, well, learn that lesson. They haven't adopted that brutality that we know about ISIS. So it makes you, it's a big question whether it does mean anything more than just giving an allegiance and getting some military training.
Interesting. Mokhtar, do you want to?
Yeah, it's something that you've always thinking about, and I think when it comes to them, there is also an ideological component in the sense that if one would assume that they're rational actors, and if I were to put on my ABM hat, there isn't really much of a strategic vision for them.
What's the ABM hat?
All right. There isn't really much of a strategic vision for what I'm doing. I mean, am I really going to declare an emirate in the Sinai? Is that really in the realm of the possible? One of the biggest reasons, one of the biggest events that triggered ABM to put out all that it has on killing the army and declaring the army more and more of an enemy is a political event that happens in Cairo. So are they there for the Sinai, or are they there for Egypt? And I think they're somewhere in between. Torn is that's not the best word to use, but I'll use it for our purposes here. And in a way, ISIS is kind of a path that can give them that strategic guidance, strategic vision. But the problem is that they can't actually implement what an ISIS affiliate is supposed to do. And so they're going to be stuck in between. And in a way, if I would guess that ISIS is exerting influence, it's perhaps against Ansar Bait al-Maqdis' own inclinations of what it should be immediately doing. I mean, there isn't any strategic value to trying to start operations west of Suez. I mean, that doesn't make sense if you're trying to consolidate your control and grip in northeastern Sinai, or to invest money in an attack in the Western Desert, and so on. So I think, in a way, the ISIS pledge is perhaps, many of them are moving in the direction of adopting a worldview that makes them believe that they are to monopolize the Egyptian jihad. They are meant to be the Egyptian group and not just the Sinai group. And so it's very interesting, and we'll continue to see the implications of this, I think, for months, if not years, to come.
I am going to open it up for questions in a few minutes. Before we do that, though, I just wanted to talk about how the particular campaign in the Sinai, how the Egyptian military wins it. We're kind of at a paradoxical moment. I think it was you, Jantzen, who was saying, or maybe it was you, and I think it was you, who was saying that finally they started airstrikes on one of the groups in Sinai, or maybe it was you, Sam. And it struck me that this is actually, you compared it to the surge. You compared it to the surge. But we're at a moment right now where that's what the United States is doing, right? Where the United States is flying air support of Iraqi forces and hitting ISIS. We're not running counterinsurgency campaigns. This White House. So what advice, and remember, this administration for a long time didn't want to give the Egyptian military certain things that it said it was going to give, like planes, like helicopters. What argument does the administration have at this point saying, no, those aren't going to work, if that's precisely what the White House is doing, fighting the same kind of war, instead of when we look and we say, no, it's better if you fight a counterinsurgency campaign? What's the argument that this administration, or perhaps the next administration, needs to make to a longtime ally, even though you're right, it's a very interesting point, you're saying it's not the same Egypt, but in order to help this Egypt at least quell this campaign in the Sinai, what does it say, what does it do? Sam, if you could start with that.
Sure. Obviously, there's a huge level of mistrust between the Egyptian regime and the current U.S. administration. The regime believes that the administration was allied to the Muslim Brotherhood, that it continues to support the Muslim Brotherhood in some shape or form, that the U.S., they're very angry at the withholding of military equipment following the coup, that there are a number of concerns that the Egyptian regime has had and problems they have with the U.S. administration. So there is no trust towards the Obama administration that these are friends. However, there's a lot of trust and friendship with the U.S. military, meaning even when the Egyptian regime was having their open clash with the Obama administration, they always believed, rightly or wrongly, that the Pentagon was on their side, that the Pentagon understood the situation, that the Pentagon was willing to invest in an Egypt relationship. So any form of advice under the current administration and help would have to come without the politicians. Without Obama and John Kerry, it would have to be channeled through, if we're aiming for the Egyptians really to change their behavior, it would have to come through the defense channel and not the political channel. So that's concerning the mechanism. Obviously, Egypt needs a reassessment of the situation. They've been doing the same thing repeatedly, and they've been getting the same results. No surprise. They need a different strategy. Now, how can they develop the strategy? There are obviously a lot of technical military issues here beyond my understandings of the issues. But they need a mechanism to seal the Sinai, in the sense of the first step is to make sure that we don't get more attacks inside Egypt proper, that ISIS in Sinai is not able to penetrate and conduct these attacks west of the Suez Canal. Number two, of course, or more importantly even, we need to protect the Suez Canal. We're going to get the opening of the new canal as Egypt builds it in a week or less.
August 6th.
August 6th, so 2 weeks. So we're going to have, this might be an opportunity, this might be an event that we would witness an attack. We need to remember 10% of world trade goes through the Suez Canal. That's if there is a blockade of that canal, a ship is hit there. This is something very serious. Oil to Europe, this is something, I mean, that could affect the whole world, to say the least. They need to develop a strategy to win the local population. We've had a lot of news about the tribes coming together to create a fighting force against ISIS. Nothing has actually come out of this, and most of it has been exaggerated games in the media. But we need a mechanism whereby the locals in the Sinai would be empowered enough to fight that enemy from within.
Jantzen, do you want to?
Well,
how does this campaign end successfully for a longtime American ally? Yeah, not just end generally. How does it end well?
Well, I don't have an answer for that, for how it ends well, but I think there are steps that we can do to absolutely improve it. I think what we did March or April when we reestablished the military aid to Egypt, the $1.3 billion. What they did, they got rid of the loan guarantees, which means Egypt can this will takes effect after 2018, but they can no longer use advancements on the loans to make large purchases, which means they're going to have less money to buy the larger items like the F-16s, tanks, and then they also divided into, I believe it was 4 different categories that the money would be, going towards. And one of those categories was specifically counterterrorism, counterinsurgency. So I think that's a good step towards kind of helping kind of put our money where we believe it's going to be best used for counterinsurgency in the Sinai. But there's certainly other steps the Egyptian military can take, like ending some of these collective punishment measures that they've implemented in the Sinai.
It was very interesting what Sam was saying before, which seems to me an enormous issue. It's like there's lots of pressure coming both from Egyptian society, from Cairo in particular, and from within the military itself to come down hard on the militants, on the Islamists. That's tough. How the military, how even a competent military would manage that. Mokhtar, would you like to?
Yeah, real quickly, because of our time. Of course, we have the strategic dialogue coming up. I'm hoping it will be the first of a few over the next couple of years. I think messaging still to this day has a role to play. We need to be able to send a strong message, as blatantly obvious as this is. We cannot ignore the uncomfortable reality of the psyche of the Egyptians. Their legitimacy is not in question as far as we're concerned. We don't have plans to install the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes, we disagree that we disagree on whether or not the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization, but we do acknowledge that no, they're not the best promise for Egyptian democracy. Right. So I think we're still at the stage where this needs to be repeated. And I think also framing our concerns about this political dimensions, collective punishment, perhaps in a way, maybe what I'm saying is fanciful, but I think maybe the revisiting how we frame things. Of course, we tell them that we recognize that this is not their first rodeo, dealing with an Islamist insurgency. And if anything, they should be learning from the lessons of the 1990s. I mean, the condition is so bad that you can actually learn from the 1990s.
What do you learn from the 1990s? Because there's people, the argument they would make is they'd say, and maybe not incorrectly, they would say, no, you don't understand. It was the fact that Hosni Mubarak picked everyone up, put them in jail, collective punishment. I mean, there are people who would make that argument. Others would say, no, that's why that's why there's still crazy jihadis fighting in Egypt.
In short, and Sam is a better expert on me than this. He actually lived through this time period. And anyways, in short, they could tell their brother and jihadi apart. They weren't other and complete idiots. Of course, the Muslim Brotherhood at the time wasn't engaged in this activity. Of course, they pressed on the Muslim Brotherhood from time to time. But no, not everyone was being picked up, put in the same jail for the same reason. With the exception, of course, sometimes the Brotherhood, gets the twist of the arm. Eventually, and this, some people might find this controversial and won't like to admit to it, but from conversations I've had with Salafis, members of the Islamic group who were formerly involved, the Islamic group has changed significantly now, is that actually torture did start to slightly change towards the end.
What do you mean?
They started to have conjugal visits. They started to lessen the torture. they had come to the conclusion that they just simply can't leave these people languishing in there indefinitely. And of course, anecdotally, we know the process of the de-radicalization and the visitations in prison. And so at least at some level, they were invested in the idea of recognizing that they need to figure out a way to handle this. And Mubarak's regime was all of its problems and all of this had come, frankly, to a recipe that hasn't actually worked out historically in countries that have to deal. I think the Egyptian insurgency of the 1990s is one of the few insurgencies that were actually successfully quelled.
Right. So why isn't there that institutional memory in the military or the security services?
Because the military was not involved in the South. That's number one. I mean, Mubarak did not use collective punishment against the south of Egypt. Now, you might argue that's because it's a huge part of the population, because it's accepted as part of the nation, not like the Sinai, or for whatever reason. On the contrary, people in the south were actually, the tribes, if we can use the term, were actually armed in order for them to hunt down the terrorists in the south. So you created a habitat that was not welcoming of the terrorists, that was pushing them out.
I see.
Number two, the jihadis, if we can call them that, in the south, Jama'ah Islamiyah, did not start off as jihadis. Jama'ah Islamiyah was really a student-based organization, a Salafi organization that found itself on the path of violence through its alliance with the Islamic Jihad of Ayman Zawahiri, Abu Zumar, and its assassination of Sadat. After that, it was a matter of the regime killing their leaders, so they strike back and you had the insurgency. But it does not start off with the absolute takfir of society. Yes, they declared the ruler an unbeliever, but they disagreed with Zawahiri and with Islamic Jihad on the declaration of the military and the police as unbelievers. So it's a different brand of Islamism in the sense that the regime was fighting there.
So let's see if there are any questions. Does anyone have any? Sir, in the first row. Can you hold on just 1 second? Let's just see if we can get a microphone. And then if you would stand and also keep it short, please.
Different question. You talk about tourism, about foreign exchange. What's happened to the Christian community since we're hearing the slaughter of Christians in the Middle East? And it took an op-ed last year from Ron Lauder, the World Jewish Congress, and Times to apprise the world that Christians are being slaughtered. Thank you.
Sam, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, briefly, the economy. Tourism is better than it was in 2011, 2012, but still not up to the levels of prior to the revolution, where it really was a major contributor to the Egyptian economy. There's also a change in the nature or the nationalities of tourists that you're getting. You're getting more Russian tourists who spend much less money. You're not getting the kind of Western tourists that you want, who spend really the money and bring the economy back on its feet. There's been, the economic summit was a success back in March, but we haven't seen any actual foreign investment, a lot of it entering the country. That's a concern on the long run. The Egyptians, we've had a very high inflation rate. We have, I mean, this is unemployment is extremely high. There are a lot of these problems. You need a very good 5% growth rate in order to make sure that the population is not at the point of breaking out in rebellion again, in revolution again.
Can I ask them? I mean, what are the chances of foreign direct investment? Like, what needs to happen before people will come back in there and say, oh, this is a reasonable?
The government has been doing some steps in terms of changing a bit in the legal framework, making it harder for people. You used to have the cases of people going to court raising cases about corruption in foreign companies, and the government being forced by court order to cancel the privatization deal, for example. After 10 years after the company had been privatized, doing business and all. So there was a lack of confidence in the stability of the economic system in this sense. That's beginning to be changed.
Okay.
However, and of course you've had a bit of liberalizing in the economy in the sense of removing some of the subsidies. However, the military has also taken a much larger share of the economy than previously. We've had a huge expansion in the projects being given directly to the military that private companies are not able to compete in government contracts, that all the contracts are given automatically to the military. And that's a problem, obviously, for free economics that we believe in. On the Christians, obviously the Christians in Egypt are facing a different challenge from the Christians in Iraq and Syria, where it's really eradication that they're facing. In Egypt, you have official discrimination by the government in form of regulations that make it extremely hard to build churches, for example. Discrimination against Christians in government appointments. You don't have a single Christian in the Egyptian intelligence, not in the Egyptian state security. 1% cap on Christians in the army and the police force, about 1.75% in the judiciary, less than that in the foreign service. So you have those official discriminatory policies. You also have a huge problem in attacks happening on the local level in the villages. We've had an attack in the village, for example, of the 13 of the 21 victims of ISIS in Libya, that the Copts who were beheaded. President Sisi promised to build a church in their village, the village they had come from. And the mob basically gathered and said, we won't allow this church in our village. So you get these kinds of attacks that no one gets punished for, which creates, of course, a culture of impunity, leading to a culture of encouragement. Hey, let's attack the Christians. Nothing is going to happen to us. And more so, we're going to get our demands met. You get instances of churches being told, you're not supposed to have a bell, you're not supposed to have any cross on top of the church, no dome, no tower, these kinds of regulations that Salafis are trying to impose on the local level. So it's still a very challenging situation for the Christians of Egypt.
Thanks, Sam. Another question?
Hi.
Oh, okay. Do you have a question? Is that microphone working?
I got the microphone, so.
Get the microphone away from him now.
I'm Charlie, and I work with Jantzen at Institute for Study of War.
Do you think
do you think that the Sisi regime genuinely wants to solve the problems in North Sinai, or does this war on terrorism contribute to his legitimacy?
Why don't you start with that, and then that's an interesting question. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely in Sisi's interest. One, just because he doesn't want it to spread. So obviously he's going to try and contain it. But he also has this military relationship with Israel that he's concerned about. And so for that as well, he wants to stamp this out. However, that plays into the hands of the jihadists in the Sinai, because they put it in those terms as Sisi is the protector of Israel, which tries to galvanize the jihadist support in the Sinai. But it's absolutely in his interest to stamp out the insurgency there.
This is actually, I'm glad you put it like that, because that's something I wanted to raise. I mean, Sam, you mentioned this as well, how, very elegantly the Sinai is a peninsula, and you can close it off, and you have two different sides, and the Israelis have been very helpful. And if this is partly a rallying cry for the jihadis, is this also a problem elsewhere in Egypt? I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it's seemed to me that it would be a problem if this becomes a phrase that's echoed in Cairo as well, that Sisi is helping protect the Israelis from, Sam and Mokhtar.
I mean, Egyptians of all stripes, political stripes, Islamists, whatever the Western press calls liberals, whatever, share a common theme of anti-Semitism. That's not news to anyone who's following Egyptian politics or Arab politics in general. Anti-Semitism is widespread in Egypt. When the coup took place, it was a favorite tool of the Islamists to claim until today that Sisi is actually Jewish. His mother is supposedly a Moroccan Jew. And of course, the pro-regime people claim that Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, is himself a Jew. So the fact that that's the way of cursing the others, that they're Jews, that's the way to talk about them. I think the military has played it smartly so far. They've been having huge cooperation with Israel, but they didn't have any public meetings with the Israelis. Mubarak used to meet Bibi, used to meet Israeli politicians publicly. They'd come to Cairo. And that created a confusion. On the one hand, the state media was saying, oh, those Jews conspiracy trying to control the world and all of that, while they see the president meeting them. So which is it? This is not playing that game. He's not stopped the anti-Semitism in the media. It's still there. But he's not had the public meetings with the Israelis that would hurt his popularity inside Egypt.
That's very interesting.
I think every Islamist is waiting for that handshake in a picture. Israeli flag in the background. Yeah, really not much to add. Yeah, I just want to emphasize, a lot of people start to use rhetoric like they're manufacturing the terrorists. Of course, we can talk about the situation helping, their policies help exacerbate the situation and things along those lines. But I think they're in a position where the situation as it stands is actually hurting their legitimacy. Just because of how...
I'm sorry, hurting whose legitimacy? The
Sisi's.
Oh, okay.
And really it's just because of how typical they are in their rhetoric, but going overboard. When the July 1st attack happened, he didn't just say, we're going to handle this, this is going to happen. He said, the situation is beyond, I'm paraphrasing, is beyond secure. It's like very, it's not the words, it's like, it's very secure, like there's nothing happening. So that's actually a very big problem, I think, with the population, that it's difficult, despite how much they worship, a large segment worship him. I mean, at some level, any human individual in Egypt, there's any educational level, is going to start to ask questions and really be disillusioned with how bad things are getting and how he's saying, I have it under control.
Right.
So.
Well, let's have one last question. And this gentleman right here in the second row. Hold on, wait for the microphone for one moment.
Hi, thank you very much for a very interesting panel. My name is Mike Albin. I'm an independent researcher. I'm interested, why are we talking about North Sinai? What about the tribal situation and the security situation in general in the rest of the peninsula? And secondly, specifically, what about St. Catherine's? Is that in any jeopardy? And just a comment with regard to the shelling of that gunboat a day or two ago, supposedly a gunboat. When I read the press account of that and the explosion and the fire that took place, the intense fire, guys jumping overboard and so forth, I thought of EFPs, the explosively formed projectiles that were common in Iraq during so much of the Civil War. And I'm wondering if that might be a source of the weaponry from Iran ultimately. Thank you.
Jantzen, you want to start off with it?
Yeah,
start off with the
on
last,
this.
and then I'll ask you two guys to.
I'm not a weapons expert, so I can't talk specifically to specific weapons. But at least what they claimed and what it appears from the photos that were released is that it was a guided missile, likely an anti-tank missile that we know that they possess, Russian-made Garnett anti-tank missile. And as far as you were going to do South Sinai. St. Catherine's, yeah. As far as securing that, I mean, that's where the tourism is. And that's a big portion of the economy. And so it's in their interest, more so than securing North Sinai, is to secure South Sinai, secure the tourism, and make that safe. And they've done a really good job at that in recent years. And to my understanding, they have a much better working relationship with the tribes in that area to help secure the roads. There aren't many ways to get to South Sinai. You've got really, and I think, are they even closed? There are times that they close the roads down, but there's only a couple main roads. Other than that, they're mountain roads that are controlled by these tribes, and they, in the south, have a much better working relationship with the military.
Let me say on that. You had 2 attacks or 3 attacks in 2004, 2005 on Nuweiba, on Taba, were huge terrorist attacks with explosives. And since then, the only incidents that we know of that took place in the south of Sinai is the attack on the Korean tourists who were, they were visiting Egypt and Israel. That's the only attack that we know that took place in South Sinai. They've been able to secure it because the tribes there are invested in the well-being of the place. meaning that the tribes there are, many of them are running the small tourist resorts. They have their interest into things continuing as they are. Again, the terrain, as you mentioned, makes a difference. The mountains are, you can't cross them with the four-wheel drives that you are using in the north. It's really the main roads. So all the factors have helped the regime in this sense to make sure that nothing bad happens in the south of Sinai. Of course, if you mention St. Catherine, the real threat to St. Catherine was coming from a local police general who was trying to seize the territory of the monastery, and that was a huge court case that continues until today. So that's actually the more threat to the monastery at St. Catherine's.
Mokhtar, did you want to add anything?
Not much to add. I mean, there's been some attempts in the south, but yes, it's a mixture of the economic interests. It's economically developed. Some people have written about this in some way, kind of a compare and contrast between south and north, and potentially what we can learn actually from the south. Lack of militant activity is that yes, they do have this source of income, but I'll add in a controversial manner. Also, I think because there's also a lot more mainland Egyptians that are settling there as well, and so that kind of balances things out. There's a lot of people, yes, invested in their security and kind of see in a clear-cut way how rolling with the terrorists, rolling with the jihadists, even if they have bad feelings against the government, that's not going to be in their best interest. But it's relatively secure. Some of the people who are on the run, for instance, ABM Musaddal, he hangs out in St. Catherine area and stuff like that, so they feel safe there.
Great. That is going to conclude our panel this afternoon. So thank you for coming, and I especially want to thank the panelists, thank Jantzen and Sam and Mokhtar, and the three of you were fantastic. And I know I learned an awful lot, had lots of questions, and I hope you all enjoyed it too. Thank you for coming.